James, thank you for joining the CEO Speaks podcast. Thanks for coming on today. Looking forward to chatting about your background and what you're seeing with customers.
Great, Ben. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I always like to start, James. To become the CEO, you either do all of the jobs day one, and you are the CEO and the CEO of everything, or you do a number of jobs and then you become the CEO because of your experience and kind of background. So why don't you walk us through your experience of becoming CEO and what you've learned along the way?
Sure, and I got some very, I think, good advice that started me down this path very, very early in my career. I started at the Checkpoint Software, late '90s, and had an opportunity to see the commercialization of stateful inspection firewall technology, and really as that market was exploding, we got a front row seat at what it was like watching a startup go from nascent stages to mainstream. And while I came into Checkpoint in a technical role and had an opportunity to do a lot of different things while they were working with technical marketing and working with our product organization. Jerry Ungerman was the president of the company at the time, and he pulled me aside one afternoon and said, if you really want to be able to accelerate your career, if you ultimately want to lead a company one day, you've got to be in sales. And I was offended, frankly. It sounded terrible. But I asked why, and he explained that it's one thing to be able to talk to a customer about technology, to understand how they're using it, et cetera, but everything changes when you ask somebody for money. And until you really understand the responsibility that goes with carrying a bag, carrying a quota, it's very, very difficult to understand how that function is so critical to all the other functions of the companies at scale. So it was a challenging piece of advice, but it ended up being probably the best advice I ever had. So that started me off on a trajectory. Had the opportunity to take a couple of different roles, both as an individual contributor, carrying a bag, but then leading progressively larger sales organizations at Cisco. And then had an opportunity in 2012 to leave Cisco with a number of colleagues that were looking to start a company in the software-defined networking space, specifically leveraging software-defined networking technology to give enterprises control back over their wide area networks. That ultimately became the SD-WAN category, and then it's evolved into SASE. But I started that job as the seller number one, and ultimately helped to scale the company as CRO. And Cisco acquired that company in 2017. I stayed on to run that business for a couple of years post acquisition, and then had an opportunity to come back and build again. And so I am very, very grateful for the experience carrying a bag has taught me. And whether that's leading a sales organization with literally billions of dollars of quota, or starting from scratch and figuring out how to bring a product to market, develop that market, and build a team from the ground up, that experience has been invaluable.
Nice. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, to your point, sales pays the bills, and people make bets on startups and large companies, and being a part of a startup, you've seen those big bets when you're working with early stage companies, right? Both on the startup side and also on the customer side. You've been in startups before. This is not your first rodeo. Maybe talk a little bit about how you work with some of the early stage customers, like you kind of in the design phase, and how you both identify those customers and qualify those customers, and then build those relationships, because those are the relationships that will help you get from negative money in your bank to positive money, and then using those as reference customers to engage other customers who may not really believe what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I believe firmly that design partners early in the process are really, really critical. I think having customers that have big problems to solve, and are willing to put both capital, but more importantly, resources and some of their sort of operational maturity maybe at risk to solve those big problems is the best forcing function to really inform the early phases of product development. I mean, it's incredible what we can do with technology, but until we really understand how that's going to show up in a customer's environment, exactly how are we solving the problem, how are they thinking about operationalizing it, frankly, how are they thinking about consuming it, all of those things I think are much better off early in the process, so that we can start to really iterate on that product development in a way that we don't waste a lot of resources building things that may not be easy to operationalize or may not be easy to adopt, and those early design partners are just they're essential in that process because they're very invested alongside of the startup in the journey, and it really becomes a bi-directional partnership.
What are some of the surprises you've kind of seen in working some of the design partners, like you said? And well, we thought it was going to be leveraged this way. We thought they were going to consume it this way, and then they totally took us off a different path that we would never have thought of. How do you also work through the design partner wants this and invests a lot in this, but you don't also know if that's what the mainstream customer needs or your specific target persona needs. So maybe kind of give us some examples of what you've seen and how you've worked through that as you've kind of built the company, because you kind of need the design partner to be a customer too.
No, absolutely. And look, I think again, it's critical to number one. I think you absolutely have to find companies that have a track record of having adopted early stage technology at scale. There's some very big customers that
Mhm.
have dedicated teams to sort of incubate startup technology. And when you actually kind of drill into it, the startups never leave that
Right.
never leave that area. And so one of the things I think is critical is saying, look, let's have an honest conversation. Where has this worked before? And then let's use that roadmap to maybe avoid some of the some of the pitfalls. But assuming they do have that, I think the biggest thing to think about, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, Ben. It's like, how do I make sure that design partner is sort of indicative of the broader market? The way I think about this is that customer in and of itself is a microcosm of the broader market, meaning there's different customer profiles, there's different quote unquote buyers in that customer. And if you
Mhm.
bring specifically a technical innovation to a customer, even one organization, you'll find 5 or 6 different folks that have different ideas on how to use it. And so being able to take and internalize a lot of that feedback, and then again, kind of say, all right, what's the best way for us to leverage this platform? What's the best way for us to operationalize this? How really, like, the problem that we're solving, how acute is that pain? And where is that resonating in the organization? And then start to kind of couple that up with, okay, and how much are you willing to pay for this? I think it's a really important process. And we see it even, again, talking with one enterprise that is, maybe a multinational. There's multiple stakeholders on the network side, on the security side, sourcing, the way they want to consume, and using that as a microcosm of then saying, all right, now I want to take this out of this one design partner and go into the broader market. We have an idea of kind of how some of those different puts and takes are going to work, which I think is the most critical thing on kind of getting that from 1 to 10 million in ARR. It's all about repeatability of that use case, and that starts even in the conversations inside of that first design partner, really understanding that there's multiple stakeholders with multiple views.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's every organization you talk to will be always a little different, different challenges, and then getting the people in the process to align, I think is always kind of the biggest opportunity and challenge, right? So you've been in security, you've been in networking. Tell us a little bit about your company. How did you guys come up with the idea? How are you getting security networking teams to work together?
Yeah, I
and
mean,
how are you
honestly,
kind of and how are you seeing organizations kind of evolve as these two worlds collide, right?
yeah. I mean, it's a privilege to be at this sort of intersection in my career, and be building a company that's in this space. And as you said, I started my career in security. and watched as enterprises were for the first time really consuming sort of shrink wrapped security technology, and this was before we called the market cyber. It was just security, and obviously now it's a massive market. And in the particular area where we're playing, which is is network security. Here we are in 2024, and it's a $32 billion a year market that's still growing, double-digit CAGR. And so to take the experience I had there early on, and then the opportunity I had to work in network infrastructure, both at Cisco and at Viptela, there is what I will say is maybe not even the healthiest tension oftentimes between the security organization and the infrastructure teams. And this is a result of security having absolutely the right intention around mitigating risk and protecting the environment, protecting the availability of critical systems, protecting IP, et cetera. But largely being in a position where to effectively implement those security controls, they are pushing the network team to change the architecture. And that could be as simple as saying, hey, we need another firewall kind of sitting in between these two segments. So now I take one network segment and have to split it into two, or maybe we need to add a DLAN here, or all of these things, the kind of the cumulative effect of all of those different security controls being pushed back into the network create brittleness, and they create operational complexity. And the network teams are 100% focused on availability and performance, right? They're architecting a network to be able to support the availability and performance goals of whatever the business unit that network is supporting. And so to have security coming in and adding complexity to that environment has been a challenge. And this is this is sort of the tension that we've seen for the last, frankly, 2 decades. So what Elisity has been working on, and where, again, I'm very, very excited to see this really playing out in our customers' environments, is what if we could simplify the network architecture, allow the network teams to really just focus on architecting for availability and performance, and instead of continuing to break the network to kind of bring traffic back, to drag traffic back to a security control, what if we could implement those security controls as policy on top of the network, and allow that policy to be defined in terms of things that the security teams really care about, which is not IP addresses and VLANs and subnets. It's really, what is the identity of this user, this workload, this device? What's the context within which that identity exists? And then what's the business logic required from a least privilege perspective to really support what that asset needs to do on the network? And if the security teams can work with the business to define those policies, and then if we have a platform that's smart enough to take and translate that into something that can be distributed it back out to the edge of the network, what we see is that the network teams and the security teams end up accelerating deployments, because they both recognize the value of taking this type of a transformative approach. Security teams can make their policy changes much faster. They're not waiting for a year or two for the network team to kind of re-architect around a control. And the network teams get to ultimately simplify the architecture in a way that becomes much more operationally sustainable moving forward.
So essentially decoupling but aligning the two different parts of the organization. What are you seeing in terms of customers in terms of modernizing their networks, and how they're, like you said, simplifying things? I know you work in healthcare and manufacturing, a number of different industries. How are you seeing customers modernize networking? Because networking always is like the last thing that gets modernized. If it's working, don't touch it, right?
Yeah, and even more so in manufacturing than in a lot of other enterprises. And I think the biggest shift that we've seen, and again, we were very lucky to have some excellent design partners, both in kind of very high-end manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, which every single process is its own snowflake. So every plant is different and requires a very high degree of customization. And we also had design partner customers in what I call beer margin manufacturing, where it's, let's try and build a process, and then if we need to build another plant, it's exactly the same thing. On both of those cases, the operational technology, or the manufacturing environments are not being pulled by IT to modernize the networks, but frankly, the businesses are pushing to drive more interconnectivity of these environments that even 5 years ago wasn't happening. And what's the rationale for that? Uh, all of these folks are trying to optimize, yields. They're trying to understand, the supply chain dynamics. They're trying to really optimize the entirety of the manufacturing process. And so the processes themselves are going through really a digital transformation, and that's enabled by pulling data out of that environment, bringing it into the cloud, having the ability to look at that data across not just one or two production lines, not just one or two plants, but really the totality of the organization. And so the business is driving this connectivity in a way that, again, plants used to be completely air gapped. And that interconnectivity is what is kind of kicking off the conversation of, well, how do we secure this? Because once those environments are connected, all of the challenges we have in the traditional IT networks now exist in the OT networks as well. And so we're seeing the modernization side of that, again, being sort of driven by the business. And we're seeing more accountability being placed on the enterprise CISO and the CISO's organization to be responsible for sort of digital risk across everything, not just the IT assets. And so that includes the manufacturing process. So it's actually enabled, I think, an easier conversation today than maybe even, again, 10 years ago. And on the clinical healthcare side as well, unfortunately we saw just a tremendous uptick in ransomware focused threat actors through COVID. And these operations teams that were already under tremendous pressure in the clinical healthcare space, we're now dealing with a ransomware threat, and again an availability risk to effectively life-saving infrastructure. And so the demand to say we have to have a way to begin to secure the clinical environment, that again is not requiring us to kind of go and rip up the underlying network and try and manually segment things, has been driving a collaborative conversation there, in healthcare organizations between the network and the security folks.
Yeah. So I think in healthcare and manufacturing are two of the industries that are, we'll call it, behind, partially because they're living on razor thin margins in manufacturing, or in healthcare it's government regulation. I started my career in healthcare consulting, and it just moves slow for a lot of reasons. Partially to protect patients, partially because of the ability to innovate, and then kind of IT kind of comes in last. So I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a huge, massive transformation of manufacturing and healthcare. Manufacturing also has been a challenge, and digital transformation is kind of enabling and solving the challenge of people, right? There just aren't enough people in manufacturing to work on the manufacturing floor that are going into the manufacturing industry. We work with an organization called MXD, which is based in Chicago, that helps upskill and kind of helping the manufacturing industry continue to recruit, right? So I think there's multiple forces that are happening here in manufacturing. Healthcare is just kind of chugging along. So to your point, OT security is becoming a very hot topic. It's becoming a hot topic for governments and organizations that are building out digital infrastructure in emerging cities or emerging countries and cities, to anything that's becoming connected, to your point, right? So customers are hit every day with this story from vendors, from the OT security vendors to the firewall vendors to the API security vendors. What makes your technology unique for the OT side, whether for critical infrastructure or non? What's the impetus, and what do you see with customers, and what is the kind of priority that they need to set on this based on how they're thinking about their business?
Yeah, look, I think it's 2 points of differentiation. I think number one, there is a recognition that these environments are converging, and that doesn't mean that there's not controls between the IT and the OT environment, but it means that that's a more porous control, meaning we're trying to get more data out and potentially get more things back in. And what that is driving is the desire to drive another layer of segmentation into what was traditionally, kind of a flat. If you think about the Purdue model, each layer was relatively flat. And so we're seeing more and more organizations moving away from that towards a IEC 62443 zone and conduit model, where maybe each manufacturing process exists in its own zone, and then we have a very tightly defined conduit for what can get in and out of that zone. The ability to implement that level of granularity, again, without having to spend weeks or months really re-architecting the underlying network infrastructure, is what's really driving our adoption, because we're able to effectively do that in place without having to go through and again change the underlying network topology, re-IP devices, and again, these are environments where it's not as simple as a DHCP address changing. There's a lot of manual intervention that's required. So kind of time to value on being able to accomplish those objectives has been really critical. And then I think the second element of that is the and you hit the nail on the head, right? These are a lot of times razor thin margins. So availability is everything. A big pharma can maybe take a vaccine production plant down for a week out of the month and be okay because they have enough manufacturing capacity during the remaining 3 weeks. We're working with a second largest flooring manufacturer in the world. They lose a day or two of productivity in a carpet mill in a month, and that's massively impactful to their margins for the year. So availability is driving the desire to have these controls so that they're not impacted by things like ransomware or other attack vectors. But the medicine can't be worse than the disease in this case. And trying to shut a plant down and kind of completely re-architect the network is oftentimes just not in the cards for these folks. So being able to do that in a very non-disruptive way and not impacting availability to then have the control in place to continue to protect has been critical.
What are the challenges you see with customers wanting to adopt microsegmentation, right? And how can customers get prepared for that? And then how do you help customers mature their practice as you kind of onboard them and work with them and kind of expand their aperture of your technology?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's 3 things. Segmentation has been well understood as a an important security control for a long time. The problem has been again, all of the kind of underlying work that had to be done in traditional segmentation architectures to kind of rip up the network, rebuild new, almost like layer 3 railroad tracks through the network to try and drag traffic back to the security control. And that is a very, very costly and very time-consuming effort. And so we've talked to customers who literally were 2.5, 3 years into a segmentation project, and they had not gotten to the place yet where they had been able to implement any policy because it was all just sort of prep work. So the biggest thing that we've seen is actually, if we can remove the complexity from the underlying infrastructure, it's actually getting the business to sit down with the security team and understand the kind of relative risk associated with the different processes, and then start to map out what those policies really do need to look like. Because when we have the capability to start implementing that policy, in days versus months or years, oftentimes the question is like, where do we start? And the second point is trying to help with that where do we start question by just looking at kind of an 80-20 rule, right? There's a lot of things that we can look at that are consistent across all of these environments. And so being able to leverage, obviously, the machine learning and the capability across this amazing data set we have with all of our customers to say, hey, if we can take 80% of the assets that are running in your environment and help immediately map those into an appropriate least privilege access policy, you can really go focus on the 20% that are the delta, right? That are different based on your unique process or your unique environment. The last piece of this then is to then take the learnings from the work that's being done in that 20% and start to re-inform the models to get even smarter about what we can do. So this is the power of the cloud. Obviously, this is the power of being able to look across a massive data set and not make a sort of real-time decision on something based on the model, but to help inform the operator. Hey, we can make smarter policy decisions based on the work that's been done across many other customers in this similar vertical, et cetera.
Got it. Okay. So what are some of the other projects or methodologies customers are kind of moving to when they're moving to those? They should be thinking about this, like zero trust, for example, right? That's a big piece of this, right? Is what does the strategy look like, and then how does this align with that? So can you talk through some of the executive level conversations you have with customers and how they're trying to evolve their organization to be more modern with new approaches, and then maybe talk to us about some of the customers who aren't, right, who are like, hey, we're not going to change everything, we're not going to modernize everything because it's going to be too much work and it's going to take forever or whatever. So kind of walk us through those two different profiles of customers and how those conversations are going.
Yeah, and I'll start with the question around zero trust, and we've got a big customer of ours, very large manufacturer. The CTO, I think, did a great job of kind of articulating this. He said, for us, zero trust is a architectural North Star, and it's going to take us quite a while to get there, but we want to make sure that everybody in the organization is sort of aligning towards that North Star and understand what their roles and responsibilities are in terms of that evolution. So, we, Elisity, very much believe that zero trust is not a product. It's not something you can kind of check a compliance box on. There's obviously critical underlying components to it. We do enable customers to take certainly steps towards that North Star around the concept of, one, identifying or driving policy in terms of identity instead of in terms of like a static IP address or what have you. But more importantly, moving that away from a binary, access control to really towards least privilege. And again, least privilege is a concept that's been very well understood for a long time. It's just been very challenging to implement. But by, again, decoupling from the kind of underlying network constructs, that least privilege is tied much more to the identity of an asset or a user, and the business logic of what it really needs to communicate with from that least privilege perspective. And making that easier, it certainly helps customers align towards that zero trust goal. I think for the contrarian customer that's saying, hey, this isn't important, we're not going to do this, we're just going to kind of sit where we are. Again, we're seeing the business is the businesses are the ones that are driving people out of that comfort zone. Meaning, I'm taking processes. If I want to be competitive as a manufacturer, I want to be competitive, in the space, I have to be able to leverage the power of the cloud for consolidated data processing. I have to be able to leverage the power of the cloud for AI, which means I have to have this connectivity. And the connectivity is then driving the conversation around the security controls. Customers that aren't looking at those things are just going to be left behind, as their competitors are driving that digital transformation into their process.
Yeah, let's talk about a segue into what you're excited about next and what you're seeing with customers. Some of the design partners you mentioned probably worked with a couple of years ago. They're like light years ahead of the market, right? And they're probably doing really cool advanced things with AI, and they were doing it 5 years ago. What are you kind of seeing with customers and how they're deploying other types of technologies, like you said, different workloads, different transformations they're going through that enable this or enable customers to be rethinking how they architect their network and secure their network?
Yeah, I mean, so on just manufacturing and kind of operational technology for a second, I would say the biggest thing that we've seen is the early adopters, and some of our design partners included, recognized the kind of the power of the cloud, not just from an infrastructure operations perspective, which is how Elisity built our platform, but for other aspects of their business. Whereas, we were still talking to folks 4 or 5 years ago that said, nope, everything has to be on-prem. We're going to run on-prem systems, and kind of we don't trust the cloud. I think the biggest change we've seen there is as we sort of moved from those early adopter design partners towards the early majority. I mean, and I can think of 2 or 3 specific, oil and gas and automotive manufacturers that we talked to 3 years ago that said, no way, no how are we ever going to have these environments connected to the cloud. Therefore, unless Elisity, you can bring your stuff on-prem, just isn't going to work for us. That has changed dramatically. And so I think we're seeing, more folks figure out, I have to have this cloud connectivity. That might be private cloud connectivity, in which case, again, we can leverage sort of the cloud scale capability, but still in a private environment. But that tune has changed, very, very rapidly in a number of those customers. I think the other piece that we're excited about is, we started by focusing in clinical healthcare and manufacturing. This was in the middle of COVID that we were building the company, and so the design partners we had there didn't have the option to just sort of send everybody home and say, you're going to work remote. And we've built a really, really, really strong foundation with repeatability in those use cases. What has changed as I think folks are really trying to figure out what the return to work looks like in each of their kind of individual circumstances is we're now starting to partner with customers that are much more traditional kind of knowledge worker, enterprise carpeted space environments where they still have this challenge, right? Of I have managed IT assets that I can secure with traditional, technologies like a CrowdStrike EDR or, Windows Defender, et cetera. But for every one managed asset that I can control that way, I probably have 2 to 3 unmanaged assets that exist somewhere in the enterprise carpeted space in the environment that I still need to be thinking about from a security controls perspective. And so we're excited to start to see some of those financial services, insurance, other kind of traditional enterprise use cases now start to be able to leverage the power of Elicity's platform.
Hmm. Yeah. I think the whole conversation about asset discovery, managing assets is a big topic right now, because most customers do not know what they have, and now they're extending everything by bringing in the physical world, or just the work from home paradigm, or and. So I think it's certainly challenging for IT, and we write a number of reports on that topic. All right, James. Well, I guess my final question is, like, after you've kind of done this a couple times now, you've gone from big company to small company to scaling it to starting another company. What are you most excited about in that journey? Like, what was the most fun part? What was the most challenging part now of this current company that you're with? Based on your experience, for other CEOs and founders and also executives who always want to hear the war stories.
Building is hard, but it's the most rewarding thing in the world. And I think to go from sitting across the table with a design partner customer, literally, kind of whiteboarding the what if, the art of the possible, to then coming back, building it, then breaking it, iterating, then breaking it again, continuing to iterate, and then to start to really see the adoption start to explode and realize, it's like alchemy. You're creating something out of nothing. There's nothing more rewarding. I mean, it's awesome. And to be able to build a team that's all aligned to that vision and delivering that for the customers is amazing. For me, the hardest challenge, honestly, we were acquired with my last company about 5 years into the journey, and acquired into a big company that had tremendous respect across the industry, Cisco, and so the challenge was we had about 196 customers at the time of the acquisition. And many of those, Ben, I had sat personally across the table from a CIO or a VP of infrastructure, and made sure that they understood what they were taking a risk in making this decision to go with an early stage startup. And so going into a big company as a startup and making sure that you can fulfill the commitments you've made to customers, that was the hardest part of the journey for me. Making sure that they didn't feel like their investment was going to be wasted. They weren't going to have to go redo a lot of work. And that took a lot of energy and effort to make sure that we could really effectively deliver on what we had promised those customers, even as we were doing the integration into Cisco and ultimately streamlining the platform and what is now their edge access routing business. And so it's fun, very much fun being back on the sort of building side again. And I'm incredibly proud of the team that we've built. Everybody is showing up every day, to deliver for these customers. And I have that in the back of my mind now, which is as we're building and scaling, we've got folks that are really trusting us with their career, because this is a risky decision to go with a startup in some of these cases, and making sure that everything that we do, whether it's writing a line of code, whether it's the QA process, the way that we manage from a customer success perspective, is really aligned to making sure that we're delivering what we've promised to that end customer, and supporting them in a way that validates their decision, and knowing that how important it is as you continue to scale and grow, making sure that the whole team is aligned to that. I'm having a blast, getting back to building, and feel like I've got a strong set of experience now, having kind of again gone through that whole cycle once. Not ready to go down the acquisition path again. I think it's pretty fun to see what we can build when everybody's aligned together.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting about building is just being passionate about what you're doing, waking up every day and just moving the puck or the ball or whatever you want to call forward, and also not knowing when it's going to take off, right? Like you have aspirations, even your customers have aspirations, but you kind of never know when it's going to hockey stick, right? And I think that's always interesting to see how the trends play with the customer's needs versus your kind of passion for building something. And when you hit that kind of synergy between all three of those things, it's pretty incredible to see it. But as a founder, you've seen all kinds of things, and you never know when it's going to take off. So congrats on having it take off, and kind of hitting that point where the customers, your passion and the industry is all coming together. So appreciate you joining the podcast here, James, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much, Ben. Appreciate it.